Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Chris Macpherson Show, where you will get all of your black and white on sport. No great opinions here. We're looking forward to digging into another week of sport as we build into the new year and keep pushing through the summer. A little bit more brief of an episode this week. We're going to dig into some football and some basketball. We'll see the return of the aforementioned, the aforeknown Mr. Consistent Lachie Avil back on deck after a little hiatus to talk things soccer from Round Ball Australia. We'll also have NBL aficionado Tim Robbo Robinson coming in to talk to us about the NBL, the run home, and all of the things that are happening there. So looking forward to sitting down with both of them today. Of course, if you want to keep up to date with us in between our episodes, make sure to jump onto our social media channels. You can find us at The Chris Mac Show on X, on Instagram, on TikTok, and of course you can find us at The Chris Macpherson Show on Facebook. But the home of The Chris Macpherson Show is YouTube, where you'll find us every week from Thursday, 6 p.m. for our premieres. And if you're on YouTube, make sure you've liked and subscribed to the channel and hit the bell so you get the notifications down below. That way you'll get updated every time we're coming to you with a new episode or dropping one of our short clips. We move to another man. He often wears a Round Ball Australia hat. We've sometimes given him the Mr. Consistent hat, but it's covered with an asterisk at the moment. He's been MIA. Welcome back, Lachie Avil, but please explain, where have you been?
Yes, I'm so sorry. Missed 1 week and I won't be allowed to forget it, apparently. A little bit of code swapping, actually, away from, well, technically, indoor hockey, still with a round ball. I'd argue one of the roundest balls possible, that of the different sporting codes we play in Australia. But, yeah, away in Canberra for a week officiating in an indoor hockey tournament. So that's where I've been, but I'm back and I'm keen.
I believe congratulations is in order, officiating the gold medal match in the boys under-18s, I think. So,
Yep.
Well, mate, getting to the pinnacle of your craft there. So, yeah, doing it here and there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's good. It's always good to have a really solid tournament, get rewarded at the end of it.
Well, let's switch to the slightly less perfectly spelled football, but talk some football. And there's been a little bit going on in the A-Leagues. We talked with Christian last week. He did quite a good job of filling in, but it's not a good time to be a New Zealand side is one thing I can certainly take from this ladder. Both starting to drift. Auckland, shock losers in Perth is probably the biggest talking point. Didn't really help Perth climb too far just yet, but it's put some pressure on for some other sides. But that would have caught you by surprise, surely, Lachie.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Perth just beating any team is quite astounding, to be perfectly honest. And the fact that it's Auckland that they managed to get on top of, it makes it even more astounding, really. I mean, yes, we talk about this being a league where anyone can beat anyone. I'm not sure if anyone truly believes themselves when they say that line, if you're considering all 13 teams in the competition. But maybe there's a little bit of that. Obviously, I don't think Auckland have had to travel past the east coast yet of Australia. So all of a sudden, doing the new distance derby would have been a little bit of a rude awakening for them. So maybe the travel's got something to do with it as well. They also missed a few chances in the second half they should have put away. So it's a weird one. It's Perth getting a win, so it's always going to be weird. But I don't think there's too much to worry about for Auckland, but it's going to sting for a little while.
It will sting for a little while. It's a tough one too. Like a few people talked about not just the distance, but the fact that the game kicked off at essentially what would have been midnight body clock time for the Auckland players. So it's an adjustment. It's something they're going to have to get used to. Wellington have done that. So it'd be interesting to see Perth spend a lot of their time on the East Coast. So certainly not complaining or explaining, just giving some details that are some facts of the matter. Another one I want to talk to you about, mate. I know you're a Melbourne Victory man at heart. Western United have absolutely pulled one out here. They're turning scoring stoppage time goals into a bit of a habit.
They are. And, regardless of what state your football team is in at any given point, the ability to just fight out results like that and earn wins from what seem like impossible situations can be so, so valuable. And to have this happen now, 2 goals in injury time, 2 weeks in a row to win games, first away to Perth and then here against the Victory. The fact that this has happened halfway through their season, it's going to give them immense belief as they head towards the final series, which, as we can look at the ladder right now, it seems they're going to play a fairly decent part in. So they've come a long way since the first month or so of the season and doing some really, really impressive things.
Well, as we touched on before with New Zealand sides, sliding. Wellington down in 10th. They lost to Adelaide, who are a big improver. They're up to second. For fans of Round Ball Australia, is Jacob optimistic yet?
No, he's never optimistic. But I tell you what, he is very excited about the original rivalry coming up this weekend. It's going to be played at Highmash. It's going to be a sellout. And it feels like there's a fair bit of buzz around this fixture. So no optimism, but excitement levels are starting to creep in despite his better intentions.
I think there should be excitement levels about the competition in general now, with Auckland having had those couple of bumps along the way, and everyone sort of doing their bit to jostle for positions. 5 points separating first to seventh. It means a good run of 3 or 4 games, and Melbourne Victory, who sit outside the top 6, could be top of the ladder, and vice versa for their crosstown rivals in Melbourne City. It's a phenomenal point of the ladder. There's sort of competition everywhere, and it's you've then got that cluster of teams too, where there's 7 games, but Perth have found some form, and interestingly enough, as we'll touch on in the look ahead in a moment, they'll have a chance to sort of tighten up that bunch this weekend. So there's kind of a couple of races there. Still, we're only sort of not quite at the midpoint of the season, so there's a lot of water under the bridge still.
Yeah, absolutely. But even at, some of these teams have played 13 games, that is literally the halfway point for them. Usually at this point, we wouldn't see a 5-point gap between the top 7 teams. That's quite ridiculous, right? So obviously anything can happen and teams can drift away, but to have 7 legit sides who all on their day can take it to all of those other 6 sides in that pack makes for a really exciting competition. And, you look in there now, we saw, Sydney and Melbourne Victory, 6th and 7th were probably a lot of people's 2 favourite teams to go on and win the competition. Melbourne City and Adelaide United had really poor seasons last time around. Who knew what was going to happen with Auckland? So just so many question marks being thrown around. And just given, as I said, how tight it is, you get to 2 of these teams matching up on any given day. You never really know what's going to happen, which makes things really cool to watch.
Well, you certainly don't, and that's probably epitomised no more than the fact that Melbourne City had to do their absolute darndest to get past the Brisbane side 1-0 on the weekend. So first versus last, Brisbane, Lachie, I'm going to say it bizarrely. There's people talking about them being the worst team ever, and if you look at points per game and everything, at the moment they do sit very high in that competition. They are a better side for the majority of their games than 2 points demonstrates.
Yeah, look, it depends what definition you're talking, right? If you're thinking purely squad and the talent of the players they got on paper, then, absolutely they should be nowhere near being considered one of the worst teams of all time. But you look at their points total, and ball don't lie, So you got to get a win somewhere, and the longer they go, they're going to be edging towards that record of being one of the worst A-League sides of all time. So there's lots of conversation about Ruben Zadkovic at the moment and the role he potentially should or shouldn't play in the future of the Brisbane Roar. I don't know if you saw Eric Pardelou's comments on A-League Off Air last week, but he was, without saying too much, a bit critical of Zadkovic's character and questioned how that would come into things in terms of what he would be like as a coach. So who knows what's going on behind closed doors, but it certainly isn't working out for them on the pitch.
It's been a tough year so far. As much as I don't often, want to see something for an opposition team, I'd love to see them break that duck at some point in the coming weeks and maybe just tighten that gap up and at least make the wooden spoon a bit of a race at the end of the season as teams try and avoid it. But we'll watch this space. Speaking of watching space, let's have a look at the very congested space ahead. And a bit like last week with Christian, it's very much a game of what round is it? Match day rounds don't really mean a lot, but we've got a big slate of games. We've got 8 games. By the time you watch this show, the first 2 of those will have been won and done. And it'll be interesting. We won't dig into it too much, but if Perth were to beat Western Sydney Wanderers, that second group of teams would be very congested then, and that'll certainly liven it up. But there's some interesting games at shape. Auckland looking to bounce back against Melbourne City is one of those that I want to touch on. They're back at home. Melbourne City, look, as I said, they weren't 100% convincing, but you don't need to be. You just need to get 3 points. This is a big game for both these sides. Obviously, another loss for Auckland would see them start to lose touch with the top of the ladder very quickly, a spot that they held with some distance only a few weeks ago.
Yeah, and 2 sides that have probably been affected the most by injury at the moment. We learnt, I believe just on Monday, that Hiroki Sakai will be out for a few weeks, Auckland's captain, of course, with their injury. So that's really tough for them. They've already had to deal with Dan Hall going out. Sakai in some combination of centre back or right back was part of their solution to that issue, and now that's just been compounded as well. So that right defensive flank from Auckland will definitely be a target point for Politides, who's been doing quite well for City, but he's one of these players that they've had to throw in because a lot of their older, more experienced players have copped injuries this season, and the young kids have had to come through, and that's been a consistent theme for City, and they've managed to deal with it very well. Obviously, they're sitting atop the table at the moment. So two teams with a lot to prove. I still think Auckland get their home crowd in. They're always going to be a favourite no matter who they play over there. So that's who I would back in this game. But, having to jostle around the lineup again, and they've traditionally been a very solid team defensively, but you're now losing two of those big players in that back four. So who knows what holes might pop up.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. The other thing that jumps out at me here before we get into the original rivalry is Western Sydney Wanderers playing in Perth on a Tuesday night to be back home on a Friday night. This run home, and for those teams that are sitting in that second batch, as I'm terming it, they've got to take opportunities. That feels for me like Central Coast have to get at least one, if not 3 points, from what should be a fatigued Wanderers side.
Absolutely, and a Wanderers side that concedes a lot of goals as well. We've heard rumours about them going out and chasing some players in January. This game is going to happen maybe like a day or two after the transfer window opens. So at the very least, even if they did sign someone, they're not going to be ready to play, right? So it's a very good time for the Mariners to take on the Wanderers, especially at Parramatta Stadium. As you say, Tuesday night, super late game. You're probably flying out early Wednesday morning, long flight. Your hours are screwed up. You're probably not getting into bed until late night Sydney time, right? So then you've only got, maybe another recovery day, and then it's game day straight away. So that is extremely tough for Western Sydney to deal with. And, they have a couple of injuries in their defence as well, and the Mariners will definitely be hoping to exploit them.
It's going to be very much an opportunity taken presentation for them. The one, though, that a lot of people are going to look forward to is, as you said, that huge clash between Adelaide and Melbourne Victory. This is mouthwatering. Melbourne Victory might be sitting seventh, but a win here could see them right on Adelaide's heels very quickly.
Exactly, but the trend of the last month for Victory since Patrick Kisnorbo went on his merry way is that they have not been winning, and Arthur Dillis has come in. Maybe some suggestions that he doesn't have quite the firm hand that has seen Victory being successful under Tony Popovich and Patrick Kisnorbo for the first 7 games of the A-League season. There's a few personalities in that squad. We saw Bruno and Daniel Arzani have some altercations on the weekend that proved fruitful eventually, but that goal when Arzani passes it across to Fornarella, you could almost see a little bit of embarrassment in the celebration there from Daniel, because it's kind of like, oh yeah, you were right, Bruno, I'm sorry, I should have passed it the first time. So there's you have to be a certain kind of person to manage Melbourne Victory. There's a certain aura that comes with that position. And so far, Arthur Dillers, he's had, I think, 5 games now and hasn't managed to win yet. So there's plenty of rumours going around that he is the man that the Victory management will stick with at least until the end of the season. But so far, fans wouldn't have seen a whole lot to agree with that sentiment, I don't think. But this game, really, sets up the proposition of a very entertaining encounter. Adelaide at home have actually been quite leaky. They've conceded a lot of late goals in winning positions to cough up points where they shouldn't have. So Victory will always feel like they're in the game, but on outright quality and form, you have to give Adelaide the edge at home, I think.
Yeah, you certainly feel you have to lean towards Adelaide. As you said, Melbourne Victory, one of only 2 sides not to have won a game in their last 5. It won't take a genius to work out that the other one is Brisbane. Sydney, it's been tough for them. They've got no points from their last 5. Now, Lachie, before we move on to the A-League Women's, I've got one last question for you here. Put your A-League scheduling cap on. There's lots of things that go into this. Can you explain to me why there's no games on Sunday just so that we can have MacArthur Monday?
To be honest, I don't really care, Chris. I think it's a whirlwind in a teacup. We're pumping games in on, 2 on the Friday because it's school holidays and kids can get out to them. I think Friday afternoon is better than a Sunday afternoon when you're kind of wrapping up your weekend. This time of year, I'm not sure when school actually goes back, but that's the kind of Monday thing. You're rolling into the new week, right? People back at work at the very least. So, honestly, I'm not bothered. Pump them into the time slots that fit the teams where they're playing. If that is then for 2 Friday games, and then you got MacArthur Monday as well, which is a much loved schedule on Monday. I'm not really too bothered about no games on Sunday.
I find it's just another peculiarity of a wonderfully busy time of season. I think if my maths is right, we've got round 14, round 15, and round 17 all happening at the same time. And then no game on a Sunday, which just throws everyone off a little touch. But as you said, if that means that Macarthur get an extra 100 or 1,000 people there, then that's a result for everyone. If Mondays work for them, it is wonderful. Let's move on to the women's game. And again, like the men's, it's been a very busy time of year. And like the men's, Melbourne City sit atop the ladder. Very much unlike the men's, Brisbane Roar in second.
Yes, no, the contrast between the two Brisbane sides is quite remarkable. We saw the Fry sisters absolutely running amok in that competition. And Melbourne City as well, I think it's a good time to point out, clearly benefiting from the quality of their academy system. I know it works a little bit differently in the women's games, but even just the scouting and the training situation for the players that are in these A-League setups, obviously it goes a bit younger in the men's, but they're clearly benefiting from that now, which is, encouraging to see that if you do put that kind of investment in young Australian players, that they'll pay you back. I think the other interesting story is obviously down the bottom of the table, Western Sydney just let go Robbie Hooker. So that represents a kind of new era for them, who comes in to replace him. And, they'll hope for, that kind of new manager bounce that we always talk about and see them hopefully shooting up the table a little bit.
Well, some would argue we saw that last week because the talk is that he was not on the road to Melbourne before we did last week's show, and we talked about that, but they certainly went down to the Central Coast, which saw the Central Coast climb into the top six. We also saw Canberra beat Western United, which has just created a bit of a congestion there with some of those sides, and a bit like the men's, while Melbourne City, the only undefeated side in the A-Leagues, continue on doing what they're doing. It's quite congested again. You've got those sort of next few teams with Brisbane Roar, Melbourne Victory and Adelaide United. And then especially once you take some of those games in hand into account with Perth and Sydney, if Perth and Sydney were to win their games in hand, all of a sudden you've got teams ranging from 9 to 16 points, and it's all neck and neck there from 5th to 10th. So the good news is, again, as we sit at a sort of midpoint of the season for the women's, remembering they've got a few less games, the race is well and truly on for the top six, which is what we like to see. We don't want to see it start stepping out, but I'm just hoping someone can knock off Melbourne Victory in the coming weeks. Melbourne City in the coming weeks. So that's just force of habit, hoping people knock off. To liven up that top of the table race. But it's certainly great to see some different teams getting up there with Brisbane, Wellington, and Central Coast doing well in the women's this year. Let's have a look ahead to what the games are to come. Again, not quite as congested as the men's schedule, but there's a few things happening by the time we have gone live with this. We'll know the result between Sydney and Canberra, a key game for both those sides. Canberra to close on the top six, Sydney to finally, weirdly, claw their way off the bottom of the ladder. It's only points differential that's separating them. I know if Robbie Hooker's gone, then that surely means Ante Uric is looking over his shoulder.
I think Ante Uric obviously has a little bit more goodwill. He's done a few good things at that football club to maybe give him a little bit longer of a grace period. But also, just going back to what you were saying about the ladder, it just shows the value of the top six final system as well. Like, it's easy to forget that for a long time in the A-League women's competition, we were only putting our top four teams into the final. So you can imagine looking down this list of fixtures, the teams that are competing between kind of 5th and 10th and jostling for those positions. Well, 2 years ago, they're probably sitting here at the midpoint of the season going, okay, what's really the point? Of course, we're in a league without relegation as well. So the fact that we have this top six, it means that there's a lot more opportunity for those mid-table teams and instantly makes a couple of these games much more competitive. So really encouraging there as well.
Certainly is. The one that catches my eye here when I look down through all of this is actually the final game of the round, and a bit of clear air on Sunday evening. Brisbane versus Adelaide, two teams that have probably dared to deceive in the women's competition this year. I know Adelaide on paper certainly stacked up well. They got a little bit of a slow start, but they're right up there in the top four now. Brisbane, we've seen what they can do. A little bit of a bump against Melbourne City going down 2-0 on the weekend. But both of these sides are very attacking focused sides. Adelaide didn't have their best game on the weekend, but got away with a win. How do you like this one shaping up? Brisbane at home have to be favourites, you'd think, to keep doing what they're doing.
They got to be right. I mean, you got just scoring so many goals. It's almost like they're just riding this wave of momentum, and it's going to take something seriously impenetrable in their way to stop them. Right? It's just when you're scoring that many goals, it's like sometimes there's just nothing you can do. So I think we were saying the same with Auckland. You get them at home, like, I think they're just the favourites every time they play. And yes, Adelaide have been doing good, and they're another team both teams really that have responded from last season really well and climbing their way up the ladder, which is encouraging to see. So, yeah, it should be a really good game between these two sides.
Certainly will be. Fiona Wirtz brought up her 50th cap last week for Adelaide, which is a not significant milestone when you consider some of the short seasons the women have had up until last season when they went into a full home and away. So congratulations to her. And she had a little vacay in Sydney for a year as well. So great to see. She's been a solid piece for Adelaide throughout. Lots of games across both the men's and the women's. We look ahead to the fixtures there. Can't wait for it. Lachie will be back into full flow and pulling it all apart some more next week. Good to have you back on deck, mate, and look forward to digging into it a little bit more with you next week.
Cheers, Chris. It's good to be back.
It's time to move from the soccer field to the basketball court, and we're joined on debut by Tim Robinson. He's a Hawks fan and NBL aficionado. Robbo, welcome to the Chris Macpherson Show.
Chris, thanks for having me, mate. I've been looking forward to a chance to come on this show and especially to talk about basketball. I love my NBL, so thanks so much for having us.
Let's have a bit of a look at how the state of play is, and I'm guessing it's no coincidence that you're extra enthusiastic to talk about things at the moment with the top of the ladder.
Yeah, they're looking good, aren't they, the Hawks? Although they went down to Adelaide in their last outing in a very, very tough game, but they're flying high on top of the NBL ladder at the moment. But I'll tell you what, we are not safe yet. We always start to shake a little bit at the back end of a season. And, there's so many teams there champing at our heels. It's not funny. Melbourne United, of course, is the main one heading down the stretch. They are a fantastic side. They've shown with their last two road wins how they can just get it done. They're a championship-winning side. And then you've got your Sydney Kings as well, thereabouts, the Perth Wildcats as well. I think it's anyone's at the moment, Chris.
It's certainly... It's super tight, and again, it's often recency bias when we start having these conversations. But we take Cairns out of it as much as they took Sydney to the wire across the weekend, and we've seen them. They pipped your Hawks at home not that long ago.
Mm.
As much as they've had those games, they're a long way behind the pack. But then it's really tight, especially the top 8 sides, New Zealand on their day as well. But is this the tightest in terms of sort of 1 to 6 or 7 that we've seen in recent years?
Yeah, I think it is. Normally do have that one outlier team, which happens to be Cairns this season. I feel sorry for Cairns because they've got a pretty good roster. Unfortunately, they've just had so many injuries over the course of the season that's kept them off the pace. But it's definitely up there with one of the tightest seasons. I think every season as we go on with the calibre of players that are coming in to play in the National Basketball League, it's just making it even across the floor. So many teams are recruiting great players. There's so many local great players as well in the competition. So it's a fantastic thing to see for basketball. And as you said, right down to, Cairns is out of the race, obviously, but right down to the wire, we're going to go with about 4 rounds to go.
Yeah, it's really crazy when you have a look at the ladder, and we'll talk about the run home in a little bit. But you look at a team like Perth, they've got as many games as anyone to play. And if they go on a really good run, they could finish as high as first. But if they go on a really bad run, they could quite quickly slip down the ladder and finish outside of the play-in tournament as well. So it's a really wild situation for a team like Perth to think that we're very late in the season. We've got basically 4 rounds to go. And they're in a situation where, there's so much fluctuation still this deep in the season.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Perth has still got seven games to go in this season. 5 of them, though, thankfully, are over there in front of their Red Army. So I think Perth have actually got a pretty decent run home. But you're right. If they slip up 1 or 2 games, they've got a few tough ones in there as well. They've still got to play Melbourne United. They've got Adelaide twice as well, who are proving a bit of a thorn in some team's side. And they've got the Sydney Kings as well. So you lose 2-3 of those games, the Wildcats could be down in that sort of play-in tournament area rather than cementing themselves up there in the top 1 to sort of 3.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting piece, and we'll pull apart the play-in tournament for people who aren't the NBL fans when we sort of have a look at the run home in a moment. But something I want to talk about is one of the big successes of the NBL has been the fact that they've been prepared to innovate. We've seen them do the Christmas Day game. The investment that's gone into the league has just seen it gone ahead in leaps and bounds, and I think it's a big part of why we're at such a good point in terms of the competitiveness of the competition. Something they've introduced this year is the summer shootout. Do you want to give us a bit of a rundown, Robbo, on exactly what the summer shootout is? And for me, it's a great initiative, and I think it's just added another level of intrigue to the competition across this sort of January window.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a thing for the teams, but I feel more so for the fans. It adds a little bit of a fun element into the game. Of course, what it is all about is each team now gets to choose one away game throughout the month of January where they think they can put up the most points in that game. And the team that's successful in doing so will win $50,000 for the club, which is pretty good in NBL standards. A nice little taking. As you can see there on the ladder showing on the screen, the Perth Wildcats are leading the way, having already played their game with 105 against Tassie, but there's still 6 other games to go in the summer shootout. So I think it's a great initiative for the teams. It's fantastic for the fans. Not only can a fan possibly win $100,000 in this as well by picking who they think is going to score the most amount of points as an away team, but it also engages, I guess, the fans, because it's going to be free-flowing basketball. There's going to be a lot of attacking basketball, big scores on the line. That's what puts bums on seats. It's entertaining stuff. So I think that's a really good initiative for the summer shootout. What I wonder about is it being at this point of the season. As I mentioned before, we've only got about 4 rounds to go. So teams are now going to do what they have to do to win, whether that's scoring all those points or whether they're going to have to get into one of those grindy defensive games to slow teams down. So I know that $50,000 is a bit of money for a club to come in and obviously to keep the fans active. But I think, the teams now are eyes on finals, and I don't know if they'll be playing all that hard for that one game of the summer shootout in case there's an upset.
Yeah, I was looking at that, and the one that intrigued me in that regard is Brisbane. Obviously, they're sitting just outside of the play-in sort of frame at the moment. They're right on the cusp. It might be a big decision for them, especially since they're one of the last games, having nominated their game on the 31st of January. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. As you say, it might be a shift back a couple of weeks and maybe play it over the Christmas into the first couple of weeks of January, so it's not as impactful and we're wrapped up by this real run home in the future. But I think it's really good. I also love the fact that it's just got to really just, if you're let's look at Tasmania, the teams that are getting called out, if you're those teams, surely there's a bit of talk about in the locker room that, these guys think they're going to come here and put on a big score. Let's get out there and get into them sort of thing. And I like that too not that professional athletes need any more motivation, but it adds a bit even for the fans. If you're a Tasmanian fan or if you're, an Adelaide fan when Brisbane's called them out on the 31st of January, you're surely getting there, and it's just a little bit more to get into the opposition, the travelling fans and the travelling side. Yeah, absolutely. It brings about that defensive component if you're one of those teams thinking, well, this other team's coming to our home court. They think they're going to put 100 plus on us and do it quite easy. Let's get in there and give it to them. As I said, I think it's a great initiative, but it's very, very risky for the teams that still hold it at the moment because, as you mentioned, the likes of Brisbane who are sitting on the borderline, even for the Hawks. I mean, I know the Hawks can get very shooter happy. They've got some fantastic shooters, the likes of Tyler Harver and Trey Kell and HJ Lee and the team that could go all guns a-blazing. But if they start missing shots like they did against Adelaide in the first half the other night, it can bring them unstuck. And this is what this concept can do. Yeah, it'll be interesting. I've got a bit of an eye on Cairns versus Brisbane on the 17th of January. I think that's a fun one because, as you said, Cairns finals hope's done and dusted. They've got absolutely nothing to lose. So could give them a little glimpse out of it, as well as being the Queensland derby. So if they could manage to put up a score there, that'd be nice for the Taipans. Well, let's shift from the shootout to the MVP race. Things are heating right up, as we said, for the season as a whole. But the MVP race is certainly livening up as well, Robbo. We've seen Bryce Cotton put down some huge numbers a number of times against a number of teams. We've seen some other players as well, some names that we'd expect, the likes of CG43, etc., getting in there as well. It's not a lay down misere, I'm assuming, but Bryce has got to have his nose in front at this point. I'm nearly saying home and hosed. What player can come into an NBL season and shoot the lights out like Bryce Cotton has this year? The multiple 40-point games at one stage, he had 4 of those in a row. He's put the Perth Wildcats on his back game after game. He does it every season, but this season is just a standout for Bryce Cotton. And I don't see how he gets beaten in the MVP race. I just think he's been too good. He's such a talented player, and he just does it all for the Wildcats. So I definitely think he's the one to beat. But you mentioned a few of those players. We saw Chris Goulding the other day, put up that 40-plus point game against New Zealand, an incredible performance. He can shoot the lights out. He's had another fantastic season. Kendrick Davis has been a real standout for me as well for the Adelaide 36ers. I think he's got about 25 points, nearly 8 rebounds a game, 4 rebounds a game, 7 assists a game. So he's one of those players that's putting his name up in lights as well. And Casey Prather for me as well at Brisbane has had a really good run at the back end. I don't think he's going to be an MVP prospect, but
he's put up some fantastic numbers, and he's going to throw his name in the hat as well. Of course, Trey Kell from the Hawks threw his name in there a little bit earlier in the season, and he's had some stellar games as well. But for me, Chris, I just don't know how they can catch Bryce. He's just shooting the lights out at the moment. He just seems unstoppable, and if he keeps it up for the last few rounds, I think he could have it in the bag.
Yeah, I think the only thing that might stop Bryce is, and it's something we hear thrown around with the US sporting leagues, is voter fatigue. And because he's been so good for so long, it's almost like we come to expect that it's a baseline of 30 plus points. But even then, he's been exceeding that, as you said. So he'll be certainly someone that is going to be hard to hunt down, and we'll see how that plays out over the remaining weeks. As you say, if he has a couple of good games in there, he's almost going to ice that. The great thing, as we touched on before, is the standard has really picked up. The NBA has kept an eye on it. We've seen some NBL players in recent years go into the NBA draft. There's so many young stars. We've got the Next Stars program. There's just all these players coming through. One for me as a Sydney Kings fan, Alex Tui has to be in this conversation. And then ESPN, and we've got it there on screen, the mock draft. They're projecting 4 players out of the NBL to go in the first 60 picks. That's pretty solid if you're looking at any competition when they're competing with all those college players coming in.
Yeah, and you take a look at at the likes of an Alex Tui. I mean, he could have went to the NBA draft just gone, but in 2024, but decided to hold on for another year. It's done him the world of good. He's been phenomenal for the Kings, and now he's looking good to maybe go in the first round in 2025, which is awesome. He's a very, very good player, and all eyes are on him. Rocco Sikarski is another one, only a young player, and the only thing that could hurt Rocco heading into this 2025 draft. He's a quality player. He's 7'3". He's definitely got NBA potential, but the injuries that he suffered, he spent a bit of time off the court for Brisbane. So it's going to be interesting to see how Rocco weighs that up and whether he takes another year before he takes on this draft prospect. But you can see within the mock draft, he's still thereabouts, and there's going to be a lot of eyes on him at the moment. Our Manza of Perth, I think, is another one as well. The Spaniard, he's a very, very good player. Everyone knew he was a great player. He played a bit of G League as well before he came over here in the NBL. And I definitely think he's an NBA player coming, and no doubt that playing over here in the NBL has helped his game, especially in a system like the Perth Wildcats. A guy that's not on, obviously, that mock draft list there, but I saw Matt Logue had reported on quite recently that there's some NBA scouts watching him up there in Cairns, is Taran Armstrong. He has played sensational for the Taipans, a young Aussie averaging 17-4-4 a game for the bottom of the table Taipans. He just keeps going from leaps and leaps in this competition despite the poor record for the Taipans. And Adam Ford, the coach, said he has been approached by many NBA scouts. There's been a lot of NBA scouts that have flown in to watch him play. So that could be a bit of a roughie that could cross over from the NBL to the NBA in Taran Armstrong after what's been a fantastic season, not so much for the club, but definitely for him.
Yeah, it certainly has been. He's been a shining light in some dark days up there in Cairns under Adam Ford this season, as you say. And I just think it's great. We've seen quite a number of players over the last couple of years. Obviously, we saw Alex Sarr last year. We saw Ball a couple of years ago after he made that back at the Hawks for the period he was there. So I think the amount of
LaMelo Ball singlets, I can say, Chris, still floating around the Wynn Entertainment Centre is unbelievable. What that guy did for not just the Illawarra Hawks, but for the NBL and this whole program. It just continues to carry on. No doubt, I think he's been one of the big trendsetters, and those players that you just mentioned have just followed suit. It's fantastic, isn't it?
Certainly is, and I hope that we'll continue to see it. I hope we get to a point in the coming years where the majority of teams essentially going to be represented in the draft when it comes to that point, because it's great. The more of these players that get drawn out and people start asking questions of where's the Sydney Kings, who are the Perth Wildcats when NBA draft day is happening, it means American eyes come onto our competition. It means young players the high school system start to consider it. So it'll only uplift our league further. The one thing that doesn't need uplifting, though, Robbo, is the run home. In terms of how it sits, we talked about it. Illawarra sort of in the box seat at the moment. They've got the target on their back. We've got the play-in tournament as well, though. So do we want to maybe just take a step back from the run home? The play-in tournament, it's only recent in its, I guess, integration into the competition. How does it operate? It used to be the 4-team finals. That's not how we run through now.
No, it's a 6-team final system now. So what happens, it's a real big fight for first and second. That's really important because you're guaranteed a semi-final spot. So you can have a little bit of time off, a little bit of extra time on the training court, rest the bodies, and you're guaranteed a semi-final. From there to be third versus fourth in a one-off game, the winner of that will go directly into a semi-final, and they'll play the second seed. So they'll finish as a third seed. The loser will still get another chance because fifth and sixth will play each other in an elimination battle. Loser gone, winner will then play that loser of the third and fourth to become the fourth seed, who will play first place. Hopefully we haven't confused too many people there, but it gives an extra opportunity for those teams that are sitting down there in that sort of fifth and sixth to make their way into the semi-finals, but they've got to do it the hard way. They've got to do it with a bit of elimination pressure as well each and every game before they can reach that 3-game semi-final series, and then, of course, a 5-game grand final series if they can get through to the top 2.
It really adds weight. You know, those top 2 teams, you said they'll get the home court advantage in the semi. All those play-in games are one-off games, but it means that third has a home game advantage. So every position on the ladder has a little bit more value to it, as opposed to, you know, in previous seasons where we've seen teams sitting, you know, 2 or 3 games out of the playoffs with 2 or 3 games to play, and they just sort of put the queue in the rack because there's nothing left to play for. And I think we're going to see it, as you say, coming down to the wire this year for those spots, as well as then, you know, the teams in 6 will be just as dangerous.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, but they're all amongst it as well. I mean, we're heading right down to, I guess, Adelaide at the moment, who are still a chance, and Brisbane, they're sort of similar margin. They've got to work hard, I think, to get in. But, you know, the likes of Tassie and Southeast Melbourne, while they're sort of in that play-in reel at the moment, they'll be looking to try and sneak their way a little bit higher up so they don't have to go straight into an elimination battle. There's so much to play for. And then you look at the top when you've got that, you know, Illawarra and Melbourne United, and then you've got the Wildcats and the Kings. They could replace each other so simply to get that extra time off as well in first and second. So there'll be no resting players. There'll be no taking it easy because no team's that far ahead, similar to, I guess, what happened last season when Melbourne United were a few games ahead and were able to rest players at the back end of the year.
It's certainly lively, as you say, Illawarra and Melbourne sitting in those box seats. In terms of looking down the ladder, I think looking at it at the moment, it appears that those 4 teams have their destiny in their hands to finish at least top 4 and make sure they get to that major play-in game, if you will, that, you know, is one and done out of the play-in. As you said, Southeast Melbourne, Tasmania, Brisbane, Adelaide. There's some little gaps in there starting to form, but all still within it. The one I really want to ask you about, Southeast Melbourne, we've seen it come out today. Derek Walton Jr. is going to be out for the season. Their import, we know he's a championship winner with the Kings. Does that put I don't think it kills off their playoff hopes, but I think it puts a bit of a nail in their coffin. It's going to make it a little bit, just that extra step harder for them to make sure they stay in those top 6 spots.
Southeast Melbourne, I mean, first of all, they've done phenomenal to get where they are. 0-5 to start the season. It took them a while to click. They sacked their coach. They got a new coach in. They've turned things around. So credit to them to be in this position. Derek Walton Jr., of course, suffered a hamstring injury as well earlier in the season and spent a bit of time out. Since he's been back, he's been outstanding and been one of the main leaders in that team to get them to where they are. For me, if there is a team that's going to drop, it could be Southeast Melbourne. That's nothing against their other players. They've got some fantastic players that are putting up really good numbers, but they've got a tough finish to the season. They've got 7 more games to play. 3 of the 7 are going to be away, but the teams that they're playing there, like the Kings, they've got Perth away, they've got Adelaide, and they've got to finish off with that Melbourne derby against Melbourne United as well. I think it's going to be a tough one to come without a player of the calibre of Derek Walton Jr.
It's certainly going to see someone needing to, I guess, significantly step up to drive that along, and we've seen that. So we'll watch how that plays out. In terms of how it sits at the moment, are you prepared to put the money where the mouth is? I'm sure you're backing the Hawks to continue. I'm not going to ask them to finish first, but are you reasonably confident that the Hawks are one of the 2 teams in the top 2 and with a little bit of rest up their sleeve? I'm assuming they should be from here.
Look, I have no doubt they got the side to do it, and they've shown the whole season that they are a top 2 team. For them, they're 3-3. They've got 6 games to go. 3 of those at home, 3 of those away. I think after this weekend, you'll nearly be able to answer that question yourself, Chris, because they've got United and Brisbane on Wollongong home court. If they can get those two done, then they head up to Cairns to take on the Taipans. They're going to be out for revenge on that game, and I think they could, nearly be locked into that 1 and 2 spot. I think they can do it. I think they've definitely got the team to do it. I know they've been a little bit out of sorts the past couple of weeks, but they've had a really demanding few weeks as well. They've had a lot of games. I think it was 11 games in 35 days or something like that. So it averaged out to be about 3 games, a game every 3 days. So it's been a pretty demanding schedule, although, some of the other teams as well. Melbourne United's, that's the smoky for me. They're just such a quality side. Dean Vickerman has them so well drilled. Great players around them. They've only got 5 games to play, although 3 of those are on the road. But that doesn't worry me either for Melbourne United, because we've seen what they've done in the past few games on the road. They've been behind. They've won it late. They just always seem to come up clutch. So I think definitely those two teams can hold on to 1-2. I just don't know where they're going to finish in that 1-2. Perth is the smoky for me. If Bryce Cotton keeps firing, they got 5 of their last 7 on their home court. Perth could nab a top 2 spot, which is quite worrying. But I think it's out of those 3 for those all-important top 2 spots. But I'm going to lock in Illawarra and Melbourne United to answer your question.
Excellent, mate. And in terms of the 3 to 6, does anyone move out of there? As you said before, I think Adelaide represents on paper one of the biggest challenges, but their away record, they've only won twice away from home, and they've certainly been front-loaded with home games in the first half of the season, so they've got some work to do. They're 8-5 at home, so very dangerous when they play at Adelaide.
Yeah, look, they're a great team, Adelaide. They're a lot of good players, but they're just a bit too hot and cold for me. I know they're on a bit of a run, but as you mentioned, their away record's not fantastic. 5 of their last 7 are on the road. I think they're going to do it tough to break in, and I also think Brisbane, who are the other team trying to break in, I think they're going to do it tough as well. They got 4 of their last 7 on the road as well. I just don't know if they got the calibre to push in. I think that top 6 stays how it is, although the order might change around a little bit. But I still think the Phoenix might hold on. I think they might drop into that 6th spot and Tassie might raise up. But I just don't think Brisbane and Adelaide will break in. But you watch, something might happen. It is the NBL, of course.
Yeah, Tasmania and South East Melbourne, both with some injuries there. We know Will Magnay is expected back in the coming weeks. If he can get back a little bit earlier, I think that will be a huge boon for them to secure. But we'll watch out. The one thing I'm hoping for, mate, is that whatever happens, if Illawarra finishes 1, that Sydney don't finish 4, or if Illawarra finish 2, that Sydney don't finish 3, because I want to see a freeway series for the grand final. That would be huge. Every game would be an absolute sellout in moments, and it would just add further to the rivalry between the two sides.
Oh, it'll be outstanding to see. And considering that the Hawks have the Kings Wood a little bit this season, I'm hoping for the same thing. But we've still got to play each other in the final round as well. So, maybe that could be a play for the spots 1 and 2 possibly to top the tables.
The one thing that is for sure, mate, is there's lots of enthralling basketball over the next 4 weeks as we head towards the finals, and the final series is going to be one of the biggest and best we've seen. So can't wait for it. We look forward to maybe catching back up with you as we get to the edge of that final series, mate, and a big thanks for jumping on the show today.
That'll be great. Thanks, Chris. Go the Hawks.
Shorter but sweeter, but packed a bit of punch today. A big thank you to our guest, Lachie Avil, Mr. Consistent, back on deck. Great to have him from Round Ball Australia. You can catch all of his football content as well as the team there to give you the football landscape at Round Ball Australia. Tim Robbo Robinson on debut was absolutely stellar, bringing you up to date with all of the NBL and the run home there. We look forward to talking to him again in a few weeks as we close in on finals. Make sure to stay up to date throughout the week as well with all of our content on our social media channels. You can get us on X, you can get us on TikTok, and you can get us on Instagram and Facebook. The Chris Mac Show is the handle, or search for The Chris Macpherson Show. Make sure if you're watching us on YouTube to like and subscribe down below. Hit the bell. You'll get the notifications about all of our content, including some of our short, sharp stuff that will drop during the week. And as always, a big thank you for tuning in. We look forward to coming back to you next week to keep you up to date with the summer of sport and everything that's happening with our black and white on the sporting landscape. No grey opinions.